Welcome to the second day of DrupalCon. Maybe we should applaud. This is amazing to see so many people coming out to help Drupal become really the world's leading open source content management system. I get questions all the time about what is Drupal and sort of how has it come about and what is your involvement been. And what I always like to talk about is the community and the way it's grown up over the years and how many folks have really sort of contributed and participated. The reason Drupal is so successful is because of all of you guys, and I suggest you all stop to give yourselves some applause because it has been really amazing watching things go along. The very first DrupalCon that I went to was in Vancouver in 2006. It was held in the basement of the library. There were probably about 60 people. And one of the things about it that was so interesting to me was the fact that about half of them were from North America and the other half were from Europe. And one of the questions I asked myself, and one of the things I continue to think about is, what's really the purpose of getting everybody together? We have all of this instant communication technology where we can talk back and forth, through IRC, email, and everything else in real time. And one of the things that I've observed, and some people I think agree with this and some don't, is that we have DrupalCons to avoid flame wars. And that's really the reason that we do this. Putting a face with a name makes a huge difference. So for everybody who has come out and traveled long distances, and to all of our European friends who were defeated by the volcano on their way over here, just again, thanks. My company, Trellon, has been working with Drupal really since about 2004. We've served nonprofit, academic, and socially responsible businesses, during that time. For a lot of these groups, it would be impossible for them to have a sustainable, maintainable web presence if it weren't for the efforts of groups like this. We serve causes that literally have no resources in some cases and help them to be successful. And again, kind of taking it back, a lot of this has to do, a lot of the reasons for their success have to do exactly with the efforts of you folks out there. So on behalf of the Mozilla Foundation, on behalf of the Jane Goodall Institute, on behalf of Johns Hopkins University and some of the other groups that we've been able to help, thank you. Now, I've been asked to keep it very brief. I'd like to go ahead and introduce somebody else who I think you all know at this point. Please welcome to the stage with me, Dries, CTO of Acquia, and the founder of the Drupal project.
I've been here before. You're still intimidating. So I'm here to actually introduce Tim Oreilly. I first met Tim in the summer of '06, actually in Sebastopol. And at the time, Drupal was sort of going through a transformation from like a hobby project to all of a sudden this thing so many people started to rely on. And so I had a lot of questions about that, on a personal level, like I was sort of an accidental leader, sort of what happens questions, but also questions, sort of for the Drupal community at large. How do you take something and how do you grow that and all of those things. So I was particularly interested in connecting with some of the other people in the open source world, and being able to talk to some leaders in the open source world was something that I wanted to do. So, got a breakfast meeting set up with Tim Oreilly one day, and we talked about those things. And he helped me connect with other people as well, which was great. And as you know, Tim has been very active in the open source world. He's been one of the biggest and best advocates for open source in the last, many years. And so after that meeting and after other meetings that I had based on that initial meeting, basically 6 months after I co-founded the Drupal Association, and 18 months after I co-founded Acquia. when I started Acquia, I also invited Tim to, to become an investor in Acquia, which he did. He accepted to be an investor, which we're all very fortunate for. And then, more recently, actually only a few months ago, I invited Tim to come and, do a keynote at DrupalCon, and he also accepted that. So, Tim has been helping me, has been helping Acquia, and sort of along the way has been helping many of us, I think, maybe in an indirect way, in the Drupal community. And so I would, from the day I first met him to still today, and so I think he continues to inspire, and he continues to support open source and Drupal. So I would like to welcome Tim, on stage.
Thanks so much for coming out. It's great to see such a huge gathering of Drupal folk here. Dries mentioned that I've been a supporter and advocate of open source for many years, and that is certainly the case. But I think I've also tried to challenge the open source community to think about the consequences and the long-term patterns that underlie open source. I think there's been way too much focus over the years on open source licenses, not enough on open source architecture. That is, what's the design of systems that makes it possible for people to participate? And what's more, how is that architecture changing over time? Because the changes in the architecture of our systems are what drive our capacity to share with each other, our capacity to act together, to collaborate. And it's so essential that we think about that future, because if we don't, open source may be something that we remember as the good old days. And I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. I want to talk to you about open source in the age of cloud computing. Now, when you talk about cloud computing and open source, you might think of that great scene from Casablanca where Louis says, Major Strasser has been shot. Round up the usual suspects. And of course, the usual suspects would be projects, Amazon Web Services, of course, Google App Engine, Microsoft Azure. But then we look at the open source side, we'll say, well, wow, there's the Eucalyptus, open source EC2 compatible public cloud. There's Ubuntu is doing this amazing open source compatible cloud computing. Is the Hadoop project implementing some of the same functionality as Google's MapReduce. Cassandra, which built out of Facebook, but being really, really interesting sort of key value store for very large databases. Brian Akers' new Drizzle, which is the sort of new web fork of MySQL. And of course, there's even Google Chrome OS. But these guys are, I just want to remind you, I think these are the usual suspects. And it's so important when you use a term like, open source or Web 2.0 or cloud computing, to think about those things that are, in fact, inconceivable. And to remember that when we use these words, sometimes they do not mean what we think they mean. And my goal here today is to get you to think a little bit about what these words mean and how that meaning is changing as technology changes. I wish this clicker had a slightly bigger range. I should have tested it. So just what does it mean? So I want to start here with a quote that I heard Ray Kurzweil use once at a conference 4 or 5 years ago. He said, I'm an inventor, and I became interested in long-term trends because an invention has to make sense in the world in which it is finished, not the world in which it is started. And all of us who are involved in open source or in any project like the World Wide Web have to remember that it's an evolving system, an evolving process. And the world in which it is finished is not going to be the same.